Hey everybody, welcome to another Street Epistemology video review show. I'm Reid, aka Cordial Curiosity, your host for today, and I also have a few guests here, co-hosts Mark and Nathan. What's up, you guys?
Hey, good to see you guys again.
Yeah,
Excited for another review breakdown of Street Epistemology.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is going to be good.
Yeah. So today we're going to be reviewing another video from Daniel Ray. He did a video about a manual for creating atheists a few weeks ago, which we did a review on, and now he did a sequel to that with how to have impossible conversations, and he has some interesting things to say, and we'll do another video critique of his book review. So this will be fun. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah. All right. And share audio. Here we go. And feel free to wave or just start talking, and I'll pause it.
Hi, my name is Daniel Ray. Come along with me as we try to have an impossible conversation. Primarily because I'm not there and you're not here, but you can yell at the screen if you want to, or talk to the screen, or whatever you do. But come along and let's have an impossible conversation. James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian are outspoken atheists. In 2015, James wrote a book called Everybody is Wrong About God. And in 2013, Peter Boghossian wrote the book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. So if you combine James's book with Peter's book, you kind of get the idea of where impossible conversations are headed, at least the foundational groundwork behind the author's worldview is atheism.
So I doubt he's read James Lindsay's book there, Everybody is Wrong About God. And just to give people a heads up about that book, the thesis of that book is that everybody is wrong about God because they take the term God seriously on its own terms, and it's on its own terms. It is theism, a philosophical idea, a philosophy of religion idea. What he's saying is that idea has lost at the battle of ideas. So we now need to move into another way of conceptualizing God, which is about using that term in terms of psychology and sociology. So that's what the book is about. I'm a big fan of that book. I recommend everybody check that out. So, but it's not about his worldview, Peter's worldview. It's their worldview is not. They would not say their worldview is atheism. They would say that atheism has no content. It's like a null idea. There's nothing in that. So their worldview is science, reason, and liberalism. That's where most of their ideas and values come from in terms of critiquing religion. So they're not using atheism as a worldview is one. That's what I would say. Have you guys read
James? So I've only read Peter Boghossian's stuff. I have not read James Lindsay's book, but now I'm interested that he's putting them together like that.
No, I'd like to read that book. But I've only read How to Have Impossible Conversations.
Yeah, tons of good stuff in that book, especially chapter 5. It's all about making sense of God through psychology and then later sociology. It's great stuff. Where you find psychosocial needs, being able to kind of interpret what people are saying when they say God, but reinterpreting it in terms of psychosocial needs, like need for control, attribution, and sociality, and other things. So having that model in mind while talking to believers is really great to have. So I recommend that book.
To talk about like emotional things like fear and
oh yeah, lots of that. Really good stuff.
Whatever your take on atheism is, I only point this out to show you what the underlying assumptions are about the two authors. So,
very punchy.
What is good about the book? There are some good things about how to have impossible conversations. They offer many different conversational techniques regarding civility, self-reflection, and how to have conversations about difficult, important, and controversial topics. They emphasize teamwork. That you and the other person that you're talking to can cultivate agreement by working together rather than seeing each other as two opposing sides. Find the common ground between you and the person you're talking to, and establish cooperativeness and teamwork. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And I think the book is good because it causes you to examine your beliefs, test what you believe, ask yourself why you believe what you believe. Why do you believe what you believe? How do you know what you believe? As the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves, or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test. So it's biblical to examine yourself and see whether or not you're in the faith.
If it wasn't, would you not do it?
Exactly. Right.
That seems like a red flag if any ideology says not to question it, or so that's a good thing. He's got some quotes from the Bible to do that, so that's good.
But of course, Paul is giving us a ground by which we can test whether or not we are in the faith, and that standard is the person and the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. You will encounter a multitude of different terms in the book: epistemology, morality, God, faith, doubt. They deal with anger issues, some psychology. They talk about evidence. They talk about knowledge. They talk about empiricism. There are many different terms, philosophical, theological, epistemological terminology throughout the book. And though they are in there, the book is an easy read. You can understand basically where they're coming from. This book has become widely popular among those who call themselves street epistemologists. And if you haven't watched my first video on street epistemology, you can go do that now. But this book was written in 2019, and it's become sort of the gospel of street epistemologists. They've kind of moved away from a manual for creating atheists, but now this book is what a lot of them go by. And
it is the New Testament of street epistemology.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. The New Testament. Manual creating for atheists was the Old Testament.
Yeah,
so it's good that he's taken this one.
Yeah.
Fact is
the good news.
I was reading this book for the first time this week. I saw many things that street epistemologists have used in conversations with me, almost verbatim sometimes. And so this is a book that a lot of street epistemologists now use and draw from. So what are some good things in there? They encourage empathy. It encourages understanding your interlocutor, the person you're talking to. It encourages listening. It encourages us to build rapport with the people that we're communicating with. And it cultivates this idea and necessity of trust. All of these things are essential for having good quality conversation. It is possible to go from this to this. I totally agree. And so would a lot of street epistemologists. You can get someone from an angry, clenched fist, closed sort of position to a position of agreement. It is possible. Of course, we probably disagree on why it's possible. As a Christian, I believe, as God says in the Gospel of Matthew, with God, all things are possible. And so as Christians, we have impossible conversations all the time because we are talking to people that find the resurrection of Jesus foolish. They think the scriptures they don't have an understanding of the scriptures, or they do, or they mock it. And so constantly, I am involved constantly in discussions with people, but mostly atheists, about the Christian faith. So I know what it means to have impossible conversations, and I can agree with Peter and James about the kinds of things that you need in order to have a good conversation, in order to engage in an impossible conversation. And so my experience, I can resonate with a lot of what they say from the Christian side of things. One example is I am a co-moderator of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, a once-a-month club. We now meet on Zoom, where we have an atheist guest 1 month and a Christian guest 1 month.
I just saw Daniel had John Loftus on maybe a couple days ago, and Daniel's in the chat. So what's up, Daniel? How's it going?
Well, that's cool. I would love to be in that group one day, to be a guest, maybe like a guest interviewer, and kind of like give more hands-on approach. I probably should do that. Hey, maybe Daniel, you should send me a DM on Twitter or something.
Cool.
And we discuss different books from different topics. And so I moderate that, and we have atheists and Christians in the discussion. It's a very pleasant and civil exchange. And so a lot of what they say, a lot of what James and Peter say in this book, I agree with, and I've seen utilized in practice. And I myself have done a lot of these things, but it's not easy. Yet Paul says, the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4:8, whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is true, whatever is noteworthy, whatever is of good repute, think on these things. Let your mind dwell on these things. And remember, the Apostle Paul went to Mars Hill and the Areopagus and talked to the pagan philosophers. And he used their literature in order to bridge that gap between what they understood and the resurrection of Jesus. And so Paul took their literature and understood what they were talking about and explained the gospel to them through the literature that they had. And I think that's one thing that you can do with a book like this, is find out what's good, find some common ground, find out the things you agree with, and build a bridge and build rapport based on the things that you have in common with it, with what's written in this book. It's pretty much the Socratic method: asking questions, being civil, engaging in deeper.
That's fine, Daniel. Keep us honest.
You should stay. Yeah, you definitely stay. Stick around. Give us some feedback on your feedback.
There's a lot of good things in here. There's a multitude of different techniques and ideas that they give you. I'm not going to cover all of them here, but I can kind of summarize them here. Keep calm, listen, work to know and accurately restate the other's position. Say and instead of but. I really like that. Somebody says something and you go, well, yeah, but.
I've been working on that all the time.
Yeah, I like that.
Saying and instead of but. It's so hard.
It's so good. You don't even need to be doing SE to just like try to bring that into your everyday practice of just trying to be a more respectful listener. Even when you're not doing SE, it's actually really nice to avoid that word but. I didn't realize how it kind of like derails people every day, like in everyday stuff. It's just good to add a yes and or something else, but just as a way to very subliminally like undermine everything that you heard prior. And so yeah, it was something I learned from this book for sure.
Yeah.
And this too, and I really like that. Don't try to be a counselor. They said this once or twice. If you're not a psychologist, don't do a psychological evaluation of the person you're talking to. Recognize emotions, anger, where identity ideas come into play, and morality concepts. Be cognizant of these difficult issues. Be aware of them and where they can lead you. And of course,
so far so good.
Yep. Difficult discussion. There's no harm in that. They also emphasize and exhort us to try not to win an argument, but to understand the other person. I totally agree. Don't get personal, even though sometimes it does happen. Christians and atheists both. Don't get personal. There's no need to do that. Don't assume the other person has negative intentions. Model respect. Don't push or force a conversation. Cultivate teamwork and partnerships. Be courteous and thankful. Just very common, everyday, common sense ideas.
I have something to say about that.
And advice.
Sure.
As this has happened even on the Street Epistemology Discord server, where I'm listening in to two people having a conversation, and one person starts by making things personal. And I remember stepping in and saying, and then the other person fires back with something personal as well. And I'm like, hey guys, this isn't very SE. Try to temper things down, make it about the issue and what you guys are talking about and not the other person. Yeah. And I usually get fired back. Oh, well, he just said something personal about me. Am I supposed to just let that slide? And my answer is yes, you are. You should just let that slide. And if you feel offended, own those emotions about what that other person said about you and don't let it bother you too much. Like, if you don't think those things about you are true, then they shouldn't bother you very much anyway. And you can ask a question about it maybe if you want, but usually I try to steer the conversation back to the topic at hand and try to maybe even repeat what you heard about the other person. So that way it makes it less personal, makes it more about the issue. And that happens all the time. And it's really easy to get caught up in it. So I advise people, if you notice that happening and it starts getting personal, try to steer the conversation back to what it is that you're talking about.
Yeah, I try to look at it that we're both on the same team, that we're both in pursuit of the truth, and we're going to go on this journey together. And if it starts to not sound that way, that we're on opposing sides, then I'm doing something wrong. And it's not the interlocutor is doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong, because I should set the tone where we are going on a truth hunt together. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah, and if things get too personal and you can't handle it, then my advice would be remove yourself from the conversation and tell the other person that, you know, you're grateful that you had the conversation. You'd like to pick it up another time when you're both more able to hear each other out.
Yeah, because you're not doing anybody any good at that point, and
right,
you're just creating a backfire effect, probably, or possibly.
And yeah, and that can happen, especially if it's like core value beliefs that we're talking about.
Yeah. Right. Good stuff. All right, here we go.
Common sense ideas. And they offer good tips and advice about how to negotiate difficult conversations on social media as well. So there are many good common sense approaches and techniques for having good conversations mentioned in this book. So double thumbs up for all of those things in there on which we can agree. Now,
the random cat.
Yeah. I mean, the action quality is pretty good.
Now let's get into the meat. Are referred to as interventionists. The word intervention is mentioned several times. And of course, when you hear the word intervention, you think, of course, intervening in a dangerous situation or in a situation that's not good. I'm going to come in and I'm going to intervene. I'm going to help. I'm going to correct. I'm going to guide. I'm going to lead.
We don't know. Yeah, please fill us in, Daniel.
Yeah, I must know.
Here's a quote from the book about intervention. I think this is from like the very first introduction chapter. Some techniques teach you to intervene in the cognitions of others, instill doubt, and help people to become more open to rethinking their beliefs. Other techniques are oriented towards truth-seeking. Some are just plain good advice. Their underlying commonality, regardless of your conversational goal, is that they all empower you to speak with people who have radically different political, moral, and social worldviews. So, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and intervening can mean all sorts of stuff. It can mean I can intervene with people that I agree with. I can intervene on a conversation in which two people are disagreeing and I'm hearing them argue something out and they're not getting along or not hearing each other out. That's actually one of my favorite ways to intervene, which would be I'm hearing two people fight over something. So I can, so long as I'm invited, step into the conversation and say, hey, I'm hearing you say one thing and you say another thing. Can you ask this person a question about something? And maybe that way you can understand each other better. That's another way to intervene.
Yeah. And then, intervening in the strong sense of the word is sometimes a good thing. If we happen to live as a thought experiment, if we happen to live in a country where a large proportion of the population believes on something with no evidence and they end up storming a Capitol, then that seems like that would be an interventionist moment. So it just depends, I think, on the what's on the line.
Yeah, I'm not an epistemological pacifist. If I come across someone who is willing to have a conversation with me with their consent, I will gladly intervene in their cognitions and instill doubts. That's fine with me.
That's a really good point, Reid. The opposite of like somebody who would intervene would be somebody who is pacifist. Is probably a good way to underscore what we mean by intervention. Like, when is it time to be an activist for what happens to be true, or to seek out what's true if we don't understand?
And I'm sure we've all talked with truth relativists who say, what I believe is true, what you believe is true, and I don't want to upset you, or I don't want to offend you by saying what you believe is not true. And I understand the sentiment behind it and being nice, but that can lead to trouble too.
Gotcha. All right, here we go.
And so throughout the book, Peter and James are referring to the readers as the practitioners of how to have impossible conversations as interventionists, people who intervene in another's cognitive processes. So that term appears quite frequently. And one place where interventionist appears is on page 107. And this term interventionist reminded me of Peter's 2013 book and the term street epistemologist. And that's kind of, I see a similarity between those two terms. Now, if you've ever encountered someone who is a street epistemologist or who does go by this book here and might consider themselves an interventionist, they're not going to say this up front. These are not terms that which they will lead. They're not going to say, hi, I'm an interventionist. I'm here to fix your cognitive processes.
Except for in Doug, cheekily says, hey, can I ask you questions to get you to doubt? Doug is like very explicit about it.
Yeah, it's really good to be transparent too. If that's what our goal is or what our intent is, I'll usually tell people what my goal is going into things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There is a trade-off if you do that.
Right.
It's like if you say explicitly, can I ask you questions to instill doubt or get you to question your beliefs now, that could raise defenses and just completely, derail the conversation. So there's like an implicit, vibe where, okay, now we're getting into questioning it a little bit more deeply. I guess it would be a little bit more honest if we said that explicitly, that we are now have that additional goal. Mm-hmm. But it's like that's just implicit in most conversations where people are talking about a deeply held belief. So it's like, I guess, whatever.
Yeah, there's no reason to be opaque. I think when I invite people on my show, as a habit, I send a link of a previous show they can listen to, and they can think about it and prepare what they're going to say. So there's no reason. There's not I try to be as open as possible.
Usually the best course of action, if somebody's like highly, highly, highly confident in their idea, like they're 100% certain, then it's best to, instead of saying like, I'm going to ask you questions to instill doubt, in those instances, I just want to reiterate that I'm very interested in the fact that they are so confident, and I'd like to know how they got there, and take me with you on that journey, on that trail. How did you get so high up in confidence?
Yeah, I like that, Nathan.
Yeah, there's like I'm always having the goal from the get-go of seeking truth and being willing to be changing my mind myself. So even if I have this additional goal of instilling doubt, I'm always having the first goals of seeking truth there. And it's still an honest process. It's the same inquiry process. I'm always trying to be open to what they're saying and being willing to change my mind, even through the instilling doubt.
And that's,
additional goal.
I agree. And, this will come up later in the video when he's talking about street epistemologists. And some of it just doesn't ring true for me, in the sense that I really try to be open. I mean, if I'm believing in something that is not true, I really genuinely want to know it. Because why wouldn't I?
I think that's, for me, the fundamental principle on the thing to keep most in mind when I go into a dialogue with somebody who is polar opposites of me in one line of thinking or another, or even maybe the same line of thinking, but usually it's the opposite, is just what we're trying to do is model behavior. We're modeling the behavior we want to see. What would be, if somebody were on the other side of the spectrum from me, how would I want them to treat my views? And then just embodying that person and being the open mind we wish to encounter.
Yeah, Daniel says doubt for doubt's sake is confusing. I think to make it more clear in terms of where Peter Boghossian is coming from, there's this quote from Peter. He says, doubt is your intellectual conscience pleading with you to be honest with yourself. So really, doubt for Peter is like an appeal to sincerity and honesty and willingness to revise your beliefs. If you just replace doubt whenever you hear that from now on with those things, like being honest with yourself, sincerity, being willing to revise your beliefs, that type of thing, that's really what he means, I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, let's keep going.
hi, I'm a street epistemologist and I'm here to correct your bad thinking. They're not going to say that, but that's kind of the gist of where this book is coming from. So there are 5 chapters and 5 levels of intervention techniques. They include the beginner, the intermediate, the advanced, the expert, and the master interventionist.
There's also a fundamentals earlier chapter, but that's the meat of it. Yeah.
And these are all outlined in the 5 different chapters, and each of them has varying levels of different techniques and tips for how to have impossible conversations. So the master interventionist is, by the end of the book, if you've been practicing this, the master interventionist has the tools to talk to what the authors call ideologues. And they define an ideologue as one who is unwilling or unable to revise their moral beliefs. And this definition is found on page 157. Not surprisingly and somewhat disappointingly, they put religious believers into this category.
Not all, but that is dogma is basically an ideologue, is someone who believes in dogma, something that cannot change their mind about something. So that's kind of the connection there in terms of religion. So it's really like, we don't want people to be dogmatic about anything, religion or politics. So I don't know. I'm sure there are many religious examples in that last chapter, because that's just the most common thing to see in terms of dogmatic beliefs.
Yeah, I think we all take belief claims similarly, in the sense that, if someone comes to me with a Christian claim, well, I address that. But if someone comes to me with a QAnon claim, I address that similarly,
right?
Whatever it is.
I always see ideologues as somebody who is identifying with a worldview, and that allows them to more easily accept things that align with that worldview, more so than somebody who's interested in picking each individual claim on its own for what it is, following the evidence where it goes.
Yeah, and there's also many examples of a particular political ideology that James and Peter have been very publicly against the past few years that would also count as ideologues. So it's not merely just them railing on religion, I think. So all right, and then keep going.
And one thing he said was that he characterized street epistemologists as like, I'm here, I'm a street epistemologist, I'm here to correct your bad thinking. And I don't look at it that way. I look at it that we're on this journey together. It could be my bad thinking. It could, in a sense, bad thinking mean something that's not logical, or something that's not having a good reliability to that thinking. But let's discover what's going on. Let's discover the truth together.
Yeah, if somebody has confirmation bias, they're probably not aware that they have confirmation bias. And I might be that person. Mm-hmm. And how would I find out whether or not I have confirmation bias?
Yep.
And a good way to do that is explore good reasoning and bad reasoning about somebody else's idea, and seeing which would be persuasive to them, and then see whether or not we should apply that to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. All right. Cool. Let's keep going.
Basically, if you have a faith-based belief system, you're an ideologue, and I'm here to intervene and help you.
Not necessarily. Someone could culturally think faith is a good way to come to believe something, as in believe something without evidence. They could still be completely open to changing their mind about that. That's just not necessarily the case.
Now, they don't say that, but that's the implication. Every street epistemologist that I've ever engaged, or that I've ever seen engage other people on videos or whatever, have been atheists. Their primary goal has been to cause doubt in believers.
By doubt, we mean sincere, honest inquiry into your beliefs. Yep.
Yes.
This remains a key goal for a lot of people who practice street epistemology. It remains a fundamental key goal to get theists, and oftentimes more specifically Christians, to doubt and eventually give up their Christian faith.
Mainly, Peter says, give the gift of doubt. It's giving the gift of having a rigorous, reliable epistemology, being more reasonable, if people discover that for themselves, that's great.
Yeah, for themselves.
Yeah.
Oh, things are getting dark.
Oh my, dark turn.
This book is also
The cat.
not so subtle, a
The cat again. The cat.
The cat's back.
counter apologetics book. And how do I know that? Well, the big things come up in this book. Now, you think about the overarching goal of this book is to give people tips about how to have impossible conversations. But throughout the book, you'll see things like the creation evolution discussion, Noah's flood, slavery in the Bible, holy book language, the resurrection, evangelism. They'll bring up these things as examples for conversational techniques. Here's an example of.
What do you mean?
No, we're not going to bring up stuff that you don't talk about. If you're not talking about that stuff, I mean, that, at least I'm speaking for myself, and I don't think the book says this anywhere in there. We don't bring up things that the conversation partner doesn't mention. If the conversation partner though does mention things like the flood, then I might say, oh, that's interesting. Like, when do you think the flood really happened, and how confident are you about that? When did it happen? Can you give me some details on that? Mm-hmm. And that's definitely like the avenue I would go down if it's mentioned. If it's not mentioned though, then I shouldn't bring it up. I have a video where I bring up things I didn't hear my conversation partner said, and I regretted it so much. It's really something that we shouldn't be doing.
I don't think this is what Daniel is saying here. I think he's saying Pete and James bring up a bunch of...
they mention it in the book.
They mention a lot of these things in the book.
I see.
And since these are the main examples of applying the techniques, it's kind of a undercover counter apologetics book.
Okay.
And there's some truth to that, sure. Maybe.
Sure.
You talked about religions. I don't know.
It's just they're great examples of typical beliefs that people need these techniques to help people think about. So it's fine with me. I haven't heard any complaints about that from anybody else in terms of reviews or anything. So, but maybe it's just atheists reading the book and it's just a normal thing to see.
Honestly, in the pursuit of writing this book, we have to pick some examples to talk about, and the authors are going to have their own opinions. And they already wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. They very well could have wrote about flat earths or mermaids. Mermaids are my favorite example when I talk about something in which we believe isn't true, and how to apply outsider tests to that sort of thing. But they really could have just picked anything, I guess. But they probably picked this because this is common. It's common to hear a lot of these things.
Yeah, I think I could see being more upset about equating Christian claims with other claims, and I think that's sort of what we do. We would equate a Christian claim with a mermaid claim or the QAnon claim, and I could see how that could ruffle some feathers. But we do a better job of analyzing beliefs and going on that journey if we can just sort of treat every claim sort of, this is a claim we've heard for the first time, and we don't know how, it doesn't matter how many people have heard it or how many people belong to a certain belief that supports this claim.
I think the reason why this was chosen is because we're trying to find examples of beliefs that we think are factually not the case. But I mean, if you watch Anthony's videos, he'll talk about, if he's talking to somebody of a particular religion, he'll usually use some other religion that's not from the area, like Hinduism. And he'll say, if a Hindu came here and they said, I believe in Bhagavad Gita and, this and that, then he'll go down that road as like an outsider test for these ideas and how the reasoning could apply the same, especially when it comes to something like faith or some other method to knowing something.
Mm-hmm. All right, almost halfway, and we're almost halfway. Good pacing. Let's keep going.
Good.
How this technique can be employed, but when they bring up examples, it's always, not always, but a lot of times it's painting Christianity in a very negative light, or subtly or not so subtly. Some of the examples they give are inherently negative and predisposed to sort of put down Christianity. So in other words, the atheism does come out throughout the book. You can see it. One quote specifically is what they say about evangelism on page 116. They believe evangelism is ethically vulgar.
The concept of that quote is that when you instill doubt and you cause someone to be vulnerable, that point is ethically vulgar to evangelize when someone is in a vulnerable state like that. Is not, I think they're not against people evangelizing in general, like street preachers or whoever. Just if you put someone in that vulnerable state, don't fill it with your own beliefs. Don't say, okay, now that you're very doubtful, let me just go ahead and say, you know, this belief is dumb and stupid, and you should now be an atheist. I don't think any SA person would do that. That's what he means by evangelizing.
Yeah, we want people to come to their own conclusions based on a lot of questions, or at least we want them to do the work for themselves. Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
On page 100, they're talking about creationism, and they mention this. Quote, the evidence for evolution is absolutely overwhelming and scientifically uncontroversial. This is found on page 100. Now you have to stop and ask yourself, why is this in a book about conversation techniques? Why mention that the evidence for evolution is overwhelming? Well, it's a counter-apologetic pebble in the shoe. These little snippets that come up, this one about evolution and creation.
We could have picked anything that was like really true, like factually 100%, you know, I mean, like the sun revolves around the earth or something. I think they just picked something that they thought was the case.
Yeah, here's the context of that quote about evolution being, you know, evidenced. Virtually everyone, this is in the part about avoiding facts and in the bad facts bad section. Virtually everyone formulates most of their beliefs first and then subsequently looks for supporting evidence and convincing arguments that back them up. Creationism is the perfect example. The evidence for evolution is absolutely overwhelming and scientifically uncontroversial. Yet 34% of Americans reject evolution entirely, and only 33% of Americans express the belief that humans and other living things evolved solely due to natural processes. So this is really what they're talking about, is with creationists and creationism, don't offer facts in that conversation because facts are the main culprit for listening to backfire facts. So that's just an example of a time not to bring in facts, an evolution creationism debate.
Mm-hmm.
Is a pebble of doubt. They're just planting the seed. If a theist is reading this and they oh my gosh, maybe evolution is true. Maybe I should look into that. It's a pebble in the shoe, trying an attempt to cause doubt. But the way in which Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay give that sentence about evolution, one wonders, are they open to changing their minds about the evidence regarding evolution?
Yes.
Yes, just like Bill Nye was in Ken the Ham versus Bill Nye debate. I remember that one of the last questions is, what would you need to change your mind? Bill Nye says, evidence, just one piece of evidence. And I'm sure James and Peter would be the same.
If my thoughts are wrong about evolution, I absolutely would like to know that.
Yeah. And I'm sure they could give you very specific disconfirmation criteria. Another thing from the book.
Right.
Because there have been a lot of academics and non-Christian academics, intellectuals, who are questioning Darwin's paradigm. Yale computer scientist David Galertner changed his mind about evolution recently, and atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel believes that the neo-Darwinian concept of nature is almost certainly false. So I bring this up not to try to disprove evolution, but to show, to ask the question, how would an interventionist or street epistemologist categorize these non-Christian intellectuals for their criticism of neo-Darwinian evolution?
Are they biologists? Why should I care about their opinion about evolution?
There is dissent in academia about exactly how it's explained and what can be explained and what can't be explained. There is, for example, absolutely no evolutionary theory for how language developed, or what the evolutionary constructs of the mind and the intellect and consciousness are.
And so because a theory doesn't explain
that's a
an
personal
aspect,
appeal to
does that
ignorance.
mean this other theory is more likely to be true?
No.
But there are also prominent people who have taken their atheism to the public successfully, who are crusading atheists, who preach atheism in an aggressive way as a consequence of science. They play on people's weakness and ignorance, and so far as most people don't take the trouble to learn science, it's easy for a scientist to say, I'm smarter than you are because I know it and you don't. I understand the genome and you don't. I understand physics. I can do hard calculus problems and not just 12th grade level ones. So you can see how much smarter I am than you are. And when I tell you there are no moral absolutes and religion is trash. And furthermore, we ought to go ahead with human cloning. We should go ahead with genetic engineering and implants of all sorts, which was smudged along.
Yeah, I found this is disingenuous.
What is this about the book? Can we get back to the book, please?
We're getting into a moral conflict of interest, which is tremendously dangerous.
It's just setting up several straw men.
Yeah, and just a moment ago, we did talk about how it is morally questionable to cause somebody to be vulnerable, be doubting their beliefs, and then immediately filling it with our own. And so this stuff about, like, I don't know, robots and AI or whatever that was about, I don't know if that's necessarily. I'm pretty sure we explicitly say don't do stuff like that.
Yeah,
Cloning
I've
or
never
whatever.
mentioned robots. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cat again.
The cat.
So another pebble in the shoe is a little bit more subtle, not so subtle if you're paying attention. But other examples, aside from some Christian ones that they use, other
The pebble in
examples
the shoe is
include
the
hostage
question.
negotiation.
What?
The pebble in the shoe is the question, not like evolution. Oh, if evolution's true, that's not the pebble in the shoe. The pebble in the shoe is if you can't reliably arrive to your confidence level, should you be at your confidence level? That's typically the pebble in the shoe when I think of pebble in the shoe, that's typically what I'm referring to.
That's good. Yeah. I can no longer square the circle, so I'm going to think about it more. To me, that's a pebble in the shoe. Yeah.
Yeah. If somebody else said, I'm 90% sure, and you ask them and you dig and you dig and you dig and you find out that one reason that's keeping that 90% there, or maybe it's 40% of the 90% is this one thing. And then you dig that reason and you just discover together that the reason couldn't be reliable to come to some other conclusion. Then why are we making an exception for this one particular idea? And this is abstractly all ideas, right? If it can't be applied to other things, then maybe we shouldn't apply this reason to jump us 40% of our 90% for this thing. And that, to me, is the pebble in the shoe.
Gotcha. All right.
Criminal rehabilitation. An example with the Iranian nuclear program, they mentioned slavery. And of course, in all of that is Christianity and religion. And so by the end of the book, I'm left thinking that Christianity and religion are sort of like crisis mode, like a hostage situation, or like a criminal in need of being rehabilitated in critical thinking, or the Iranian nuclear program, or slavery, or something like that. At the end of this, if you're a skeptic, you get the idea that Christianity is just as bad as being in a hostage situation.
No, it's just hostage negotiators have used various techniques, and they are evidence-based techniques to get people to be more open to questioning their beliefs and having it's mainly about rapport and maintaining rapport. Those techniques about hostage negotiations. So just because the word hostage negotiations appears in the book doesn't mean we equivocate Christians or religious people, or whenever we're encountering someone with that belief that it's at the level of a hostage negotiation. I mean, if you've seen our videos, we're pretty chill. We're not feeling like we're in an intense hostage negotiation situation, talking with religious people.
And when you often at the very end of these conversations we have with people, or at least on my end, I'll ask how the conversation went. How did it feel for you? And typically it's quite positive, not the hostage feeling.
Yeah, that whole chapter to me is about maintaining a level of respect and gaining their trust and interest more so than it is about, making them do something or changing their behavior in that respect.
Yeah, it's mainly about building rapport for me and maintaining it. There's just small things like minimal encouragers and emotional labeling, stuff like that, mirroring. This is about rapport for me. So that's what the hostage negotiations is used for in the book.
And that you need to go out and find your Christian friends and help them escape from the shackles of the faith-based belief system. And that's the impression that this book left me, given the way that they interspersed Christian examples with all of these other ones, that Christianity is some kind of crisis from which people need to be saved. And
what about let friends be wrong? That's another section in the book.
Also in the book.
Yeah. Peter is good friends with the VeggieTales guy, and they're good friends. Peter's not in a hostage negotiation situation whenever he talks to Phil Vischer. Is that what his name is? So, and James lives in Tennessee. He's surrounded by Christians. I'm sure he has no problem going along with living with Christians. And like most people are Christian in the U.S., we're not in a hostage negotiation situation every time we encounter Christians. So,
if anything, SE has helped me practice this idea of not canceling people because they think differently than me. And I live in Portland, Oregon. A lot of my friends are canceling their more conservative friends if they're liberal, and if they're liberal, if they're conservative, then sometimes they're also canceling their liberal friends. Yeah. And I have yet to ever unfriend somebody or cancel somebody out just because I very sternly disagree with them. If anything, I feel more open now to talking and engaging with them and maintaining relationships because of books like this.
Nice. Cool. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
And here we are, the interventionists coming to rescue you with logic, reason, and epistemology. And that's kind of the gist of the book. But that's another pebble in the shoe, that how the light in which Christianity is portrayed. What seems to be underlying their foundational epistemology about religious belief is that religious belief is a kind of knowledge or a kind of belief without evidence. On page 117, under the heading of epistemological questions, you find this sentence: then the belief is not held on the basis of evidence. And so this seems to be what Peter Boghossian was talking about in 2013 in his manual for creating atheists, that faith in God, belief in God, religion, Christianity is all a belief system without any kind of substantial objective evidence. This is implied empiricism, and I dealt with empiricism in the other video. Basically, it seems that they're suggesting, maybe not suggesting, maybe they actually believe this, that the only kind of true knowledge, the only kind of knowledge that is allowable is the kind of knowledge that you can test and prove through the tactile empirical senses. It's the only kind of true knowledge.
I would very much doubt Peter or James believes empirical knowledge is the only kind of true knowledge you can have. So I would doubt that. I don't know what evidence there is for that from the book, but most empirical claims, like all empirical claims, should use empiricism to justify those claims. That seems reasonable. But I've had a conversation myself with Peter about is there such a thing as moral facts? That's on my channel. You can check that out. And he talks about thought experiment as a way to coming to have confidence that there are such a thing as moral facts, like John Rawls' veil of ignorance thought experiment. That's not empirical. That's merely thought and rationality, reason itself. So that's an addition to empiricism to coming to knowledge, like moral knowledge.
is the physical kind, like what color is this pen, or how much do I weigh, or how tall am I, or how far away is it to Chicago. The empirical sort of data seems to be the only kind of acceptable evidence that a street epistemologist will accept when you talk about testing for your beliefs. But of course,
Daniel asked a question in the comments.
This last one.
Yeah.
Do we apply empirical methods to God's existence? That was my take. I did not make clear in the video. There are many empirical claims about God. Sometimes is an empirical claim, like miracles and resurrections and flying to heaven on winged horses, and the sun going away for a couple hours. There are many empirical claims about religious thought and ideology. I'm not sure what you mean, Daniel. Be more. Many essayers will ultimately demand empirical evidence from me for God's existence. Yeah, maybe not demand, but I think it would be good to have empirical evidence for a God, if possible. But there could be other ways to have confidence without empirical evidence. I don't think but that's a whole other discussion. Anything else about that?
Yeah, and I'm just interested in the disconfirmation criteria. If our evidence is not empirical, then how could we question it? And so long as there's something to support that or some answer for that, then that might be valid. We'd have to talk about it.
Yeah, the God hypothesis, in order to have any value, would need to be falsifiable. It's not that we want to falsify everything we accept as true. I don't know what that means. We want the hypothesis to be falsifiable. We want to be able to know that we're not stuck believing something false for our entire lives. So we could come up with things hypothetically that we could experience that would shift our confidence up or down.
And things that are not falsifiable could still be true. It's just we're left in a difficult spot at that point about maybe we shouldn't believe it until we are more unsolved.
Right. The question is whether or not we are wrong and are stuck being wrong and we don't know it, and what could we look for to recognize if we happen to be wrong. And this is why I was bringing up mermaids earlier. Somebody else comes in the conversation, they believe in mermaids, and we ask, what would it take for you to doubt mermaids? And they say, well, you'd have to show me the absence of mermaids. And in that instance, that person could very well be stuck forever if there happens to not be any mermaids, because you wouldn't be able to show them every square inch of the entire ocean all at once, right? So that's the reason why empirical evidence to move us up is so much more important, and having criteria that could knock us down.
Right. It's a big topic, falsifiability and testability and hypothesis testing, but we'll keep going. I'm sure it comes up again.
Empiricism as an epistemology didn't work. It failed in the 20th century because you cannot use empiricism to validate the philosophy of empiricism as an epistemology. In other words, you can't use empiricism to prove a philosophy because a philosophy isn't tactile like a pen or eyeglasses.
That's why I recommend Kind Inquisitors. Peter and James recommend that book. It is about this higher level epistemology, liberal science, which includes other ways to come to knowledge. Anything else?
I just like the sound effect it makes when he touches his glasses. Nice touch.
Good production value.
If there's no tangible physical evidence for what you believe, then you should doubt your beliefs.
No.
This seems to be the underlying paradigm of their epistemology when it comes to testing your beliefs.
Well, we could steelman that. I mean, you should be, instead of doubting, I mean, you should maybe question the reliability of the belief and maybe a better way to put it. I don't know.
maybe.
Well, he said this word testing, and I guess when it comes to testing, we just want to know whether or not that test that we do that affirms our belief could potentially fail. And if the test only ever gives us an A+ back on our test when we're done and can't conceivably give us an F, then we should question the test at all, right? We should question whether or not we should use the test to build our confidence if the test can't produce a failure result.
Yeah.
Page 34. The goal of an intervention is to help people become less confident about what they believe, which is where changing someone's mind begins. Their goal is to make you less confident about what you believe. And as we already have seen, given the fact that they're atheists, one of the primary goals is to have you be less confident of your belief in God. On page 34 again, quote, in other words, just by speaking with someone, you'll be able to intercede in their cognitions and give them the gift of doubt, the gift of doubt. And so the whole point of being an interventionist is to induce and give doubt. That's all you're really doing. Here are some conversational techniques, all of which are good, but the goal really is to use these good conversational techniques and begin the process of instilling doubt in people's minds who believe in God.
Wouldn't we want you to become more confident about your beliefs if it's in fact a true belief?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's back to this, Peter's usage of the word doubt. It comes from, I think, a Platonic dialogue at some point. Socrates uses doubt in some way that implies it's about really inquiry and sincerity and openness to revising your own beliefs. That is the gift of doubt. It's like it's more of an attitude. It's more of a gift of the skeptical attitude. It's not really about doubting. We don't want people to doubt true beliefs. We want them to be able to question their beliefs sincerely and honestly and openly, have that ability to do for themselves.
And so we see on page 73, this comes out of context of Peter Boghossian's relationship with Phil Vischer, who was the creator of VeggieTales. Phil, of course, is Christian. And this quote says that even though Peter has spent much of his professional life helping people escape faith-based belief systems, Phil and Peter are friends. This quote shows that Peter's life has been dedicated to helping people escape faith-based belief systems. And so I think that sums up at least Peter's intent in this book, is to use these conversational techniques to help people doubt and get out of their belief in God.
The cat.
The cat again.
The cat's back.
any faith-based.
Faith-based, the verb version of faith, the belief without evidence. Peter is an educator and assistant philosophy professor. He's about that, helping people embrace reason and have good epistemologies for themselves. That's what he means by that, I think.
Now, this is interesting. Page 103, they say, do not turn conversations into debates by giving your conversation partner a reason to defend her beliefs. This is especially true if your goal is to instill doubt. So in other words, if you're trying to get them to doubt, don't let them defend their beliefs. So it seems the goal is not...
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
To get them to doubt, instill doubt.
I'm not sure exactly where he was going with that one, but maybe.
Don't turn your conversations into debates, which means don't give facts, don't give arguments to persuade someone that you think that will persuade someone. That will make them defensive. That will most likely give the backfire effect, and that's not helpful if you want to help them reflect on the belief, instill doubt. That's true.
Yeah, I'm way less interested in the conclusion, and I'm more interested in the tool that we use to arrive at that conclusion. And I think that's what Juggling Lessons is saying in the comments there.
Yeah, there's a difference between helping, doing something that would make someone want to defend their beliefs. It puts them in a defensive posture. Something that raises defenses and that would be not helpful to actually getting to like to learn more about their beliefs just through a cooperative inquiry process. We still want to learn what they believe and why as clear as possible, but we would, in order to get there, we don't throw out our own talking points and evidence ourselves. That just inhibits that process.
And again, if we're having a conversation about beliefs and either side is getting defensive, then something's gone wrong with the conversation. Then it's not helpful, and nobody wins.
So Daniel Ray says in the comments, but that's Peter's definition of faith, not mine. And fair enough. Like in a new conversation with somebody new, I forget everything that I know about faith, and I ask them what they mean by faith. And then I just ask if faith their definition of faith can be used to arrive at other conclusions. And if it can, then we should look into that together.
And if you're new to street epistemology, faith's a tricky word that can, sometimes you think you know what your interlocutor is using, what he's saying by using the word faith, but that can actually change midstream. And so it needs to be kind of defined from the onset.
Yeah, Daniel says, but it assumes one's beliefs are in need of revising. Not sure what he means, but I do think I have currently false beliefs in my head, and I think that could cause harm if I act upon them, but I don't know what they are, and I don't know where to start to figure that out unless I talk with people about my beliefs and be open to questioning them. So and even if I come across, questioning a belief that is actually true, that's just reinforcing my confidence in the belief if I go through that process and make it more clear why I believe. So it can't hurt to question things that are true. They're true. And if you question things that are true, you'll just figure out why they're true.
So in other words, if you're trying to get them to doubt, don't let them defend their beliefs. So it seems the goal is not finally honest conversation, but instilling and inducing doubt.
Back to that quote about, the conscience, doubt is, I forgot exactly what it is. It's about that being honest with yourself. It's your personal intellectual conscience wanting you to be honest with yourself. So it is about honesty. That is what doubt is about for Peter.
Yeah, and Daniel, if you want to put your definition of, because you're mentioning faith a lot in the comments, feel free to just write down your definition of faith in the comments. I'd love to hear a new version.
Mm-hmm.
The cat.
So once more, I mentioned this in the other video. They reintroduced the confidence scale, which so many street epistemologists use. And basically what that is basically they'll ask you the question, how confident are you that your belief in X is true? And then they'll give you a numerical scale. 1 if you're not confident at all, 10 if you're very confident, or sometimes it's a percentage between 1% and 100%. But this confidence scale here is reintroduced in the book. They spend several pages on it. And what's the purpose of it? It's what I addressed in the previous video. The purpose of it is found on page 86. This is pretty remarkable, I think. You now have a discrete metric that tracks your ability to intervene, there's the word again, in someone's cognitions and instill doubt.
It does work that way. If someone revises their confidence, that means you have helped them to reflect on whatever they believe and why. And by instilling doubt, it's about going through that inquiry process. It's not like we want people to just merely go from a very confident to less confident. It depends on the claim. Maybe some people start at a very low confidence level, and we would want to intervene to make them go up. It's just the word doubt is a little confusing. So, yeah. Anything else?
Yeah,
just that the scale is flexible. That's
I'm not wed to a scale. It's just useful. It's just helpful to know where the person's coming from, and so we're talking about the same thing.
So long as we measure confidence, that's the idea. We just want to measure it and track it over time, because it's helpful to figure out whether or not our questions made an impact on the belief. If they didn't, then that's also fine, and we can measure it that way too. It's just a way to keep track of the other person's mindset and show that we care about their mindset too.
Yeah. And now I'm starting to interview people like more than once, and it's nice when they come back on the show and kind of, you were at this number before, and now where are you still here? You're higher or lower, and now they've had a chance to think about it. It's just a useful way to kind of gauge someone's beliefs.
I use a scale all the time for my own personal beliefs whenever I'm assessing my confidence about something, and I doubt all sorts of stuff that I believe. And so I like to ask myself, if I'm struggling to figure out whether or not something is true, I ask myself, what would raise my confidence? What would lower my confidence? And that internal mental exercise is good, I think, for me to help me figure out my own standards for belief.
Right.
Now, there it is in black and white. Why is this numerical scale being utilized? As a tool to help the interventionist / street epistemologist instill doubt. You can see they go from a 10 to a 7 or something like that. That's their goal, and that's what this is for. And so many times I have seen and heard and have had it used on myself on a scale of 1 to 10. How confident are you? And so, as I said in the previous video, the best way to counter that is just to say, I'm confident. And even in the book, they mentioned if somebody doesn't go down the numerical scale road with the conversationalist, to abandon that technique. And so the best thing to do if you encounter this and you don't want to go down that road is just to say, I'm confident that God exists.
That's fine.
That's fine as well. You can be
good with that.
Don't have to be explicit.
You can do it to boost confidence too. So if I think I know solid, reliable evidence to be confident in my claim, and somebody else that I'm talking to hasn't yet experienced this evidence, or they've not seen it for themselves, then I can ask them a hypothetical question. If you were to see said evidence, would that bump you up? And if they say, yes, that would, you just say, great, I think that's really neat. I would encourage you to look into whether or not that evidence is out there. You don't even need to mention the evidence, and you can leave the conversation there if it's a really short conversation. And they may go out, that's a pebble in their shoe to boost their confidence. Maybe they'll go out and find that evidence does exist and it is reliable, and that can boost their confidence in something.
Yep. Angry cat.
At the beginning of the book, we're given advice that seems contrary to this instilling doubt. On page 45, it says, quote, the best questions show you're sincerely interested in exploring answers, as opposed to asking a question to achieve some goal. Now, it would seem that I would agree with that statement, that if you're really interested in a conversation, you just want to learn what the other person believes, and you genuinely want to get to know the other person, and you're interested in what they believe, and you have no necessary agenda. Now, if you're a Christian and you're talking to an atheist, of course Christians want people to come to know who Jesus is. We're not secret about that.
This is in the context of focusing on questions and using calibrated questions, and that comes from the section Be Authentic. The best questions show you're sincerely interested in exploring answers, as opposed to asking a question to achieve some goal. People respect and crave authenticity and distrust gimmicks. If you're genuinely interested in your discussion question, it will show. I agree with that.
But we can have genuine conversations and really get to know people. And I think atheists can too. I'm not saying that no one can have no one is capable of a sincere conversation. Of course we can. But here in this book, it seems like the good conversational tactics are sort of being utilized for the sole purpose of getting people to doubt what they believe. And again, on page 45, they advise, don't disguise statements as questions and avoid leading questions that carry an agenda. So it's kind of confusing. They say, well, I would agree with this too. If you don't ask questions, don't hide things in your questions, but ask sincere questions. without an agenda. But yet it seems the book's agenda is, here are some tools for conversations that ultimately, hopefully, will lead people, theists, to doubt their faith.
The agenda is perfectly clear. We want people to help help themselves reflect on their own beliefs cooperatively together. It's not like we want to ask leading questions to get them to have some type of temporary loss of confidence or doubt. We want them to be reliably reasonable, and we want them to have a pebble in their shoe so they can be able to be more reasonable for the rest of their lives. That one conversation is not going to make them do that if we just do something with an agenda. It has to be sincere, it has to be open, and we have to be all along willing to revise our own beliefs and just be reasonable together. Anything else about that?
I just think of myself as a mirror to a mirror image of the other person's thoughts and ideas. I'm really heavy on repeating what I'm hearing, and then I'm trying to be a mirror image about what it takes to move up and down the scale more than anything.
I would like people to believe in beliefs if they are true beliefs, and if the beliefs are not true, I'd like them to jettison those beliefs.
Yes.
That's my agenda.
Yeah.
The authors talk about disconfirmation examples. And on page 111, they say this, quote, examples of wildly implausible disconfirmation conditions held by otherwise sane people abound in the field of theology. Whoa, what does that mean? Well, basically, this is what they do. So they give an example of someone who believes in the resurrection. And the interventionist will ask the question, what would change your mind about Jesus's resurrection? And then the authors say that Christians will make something up that could not possibly come to pass. Show me the bones of Jesus. Well, that doesn't seem like it would ever happen. And so the author suggests that this is a Christian wanting to sound reasonable, but really they're not, because all they're doing is trying to justify their beliefs in the absence of evidence. So the authors say the Christian's beliefs are not, quote, warranted on the basis of evidence, end quote. And so what they're suggesting is that the Christian who says, show me the bones of Jesus, is not being sincere. They're accusing the Christian of being insincere at this point, and that the Christian is merely just trying to find a way to compensate for the missing objective evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And so what James and Peter seem to have done is completely dismiss everything that we have regarding the resurrection of Jesus and just saying there's no evidence.
So what we're talking about here is what's called wild disconfirmation criteria. Basically offering up disconfirmation criteria that could under no circumstances ever be achieved if the thing actually is false. So this is why I go to mermaids. And I think that maybe in the book, that example was a little too on the nose for somebody who is practicing that said belief. So the way I would like to interpret it is think of something which we agree is false, like mermaids, and imagine they come to us, somebody who believes in mermaids, and they say, the thing that would make me no longer believe is evidence that there aren't mermaids. But imagine for a moment that there actually aren't. Like, what do we do with that idea? If that person will only doubt under the condition that you give them evidence that that thing isn't there, how could you satisfy that condition if the thing actually isn't there?
Negative. Yeah.
In other words, that person is stuck believing in mermaids forever, and there's nothing that you could do they would be stuck. And so what I like to do is make it less personal. Disconfirmation criteria is really important, I'd say, to give us warranted confidence. So we need to underscore that and really nail that down. And if somebody says, I need the bones of Christ to believe that he didn't disappear from planet Earth. Well, if there wasn't a Jesus, or if that didn't happen, or if there's no way to identify these bones as being Jesus's bones, then we would be stuck forever, wouldn't we? Or, I mean, that's essentially the circumstance that we're under, and why we think disconfirmation criteria is so important. Do you have anything about that, Reid? Am I off on that at all?
No, sounds right. It's about, we want to have consistent levels of criteria for our beliefs, and it's just like we want to have not different standards for disconfirmation, for like coming to the belief versus disconfirmation.
Right.
If it requires like a vast pile of evidence to disconfirm, but only just this little thing to confirm it, why is there a disparity there? And like the bones of Christ is like equivalent to like an extraordinary thing, wildly implausible, that would need to disconfirm it versus what.
And this part is so crucial of the book. This is probably to me the most crucial part. And when it comes to like things like gravity, for example, like if I have something in my hand, this is my AirPods case, and I let go of it, it will fall to the ground. That's my claim. It will fall every time. And the disconfirmation criteria is just the opportunity for the thing not to fall, and imagining it not falling and it doing something else, like floating in midair or flying upwards. That would be a hypothetical, achievable, testable thing we can do right now to show that it does fall every time. And so when it comes to claims like mermaids, how would we know if there's no physical evidence of mermaids now? We can't use the absence, like you can't prove me wrong. You can't show that there aren't mermaids. Exactly. And that's the problem, right? If you can't show that there aren't there, and the evidence to get us there is questionable, then we ought to be low on our confidence scale until such time as we can test the thing. And by test, we mean a test that can be proven wrong, a test that could lower our confidence, and that ceases to do so.
Yeah. If we want to seek truth, it would be in our best interest to identify very, very specific things we could experience or learn or find out to change our confidence, to change our mind. If we don't have those things in mind, or we can't even begin to think about something that is even remotely plausible, then we could be going out through our entire lives believing something that's not true.
Yeah, and
the important thing is that we're stuck.
Don't want to be stuck.
And mermaids may very well exist.
Exactly.
But maybe a better default position would be, let's not believe in that until there's evidence or a test to show that that does exist.
And by not believe, we don't mean believe the opposite. Know that there aren't, at least in my view. And it's just we withhold belief, meaning I'm letting this idea go for the meantime until there's a reason to hold on to it. I mean, these are just words that I don't know. It's just like a way of saying, I don't know. This stuff is hard.
All right, we're almost over time. Let's finish this off.
Okay.
And so whenever a Christian is asked this question, they're already put in an impossible situation by the street epistemologist interventionists who thinks there is no evidence. And so that's a whole nother video about evidence. But the question and the problem here is the way in which these authors have put the Christian into a box. They have assumed the Christian is being insincere. They've assumed the Christian is being defensive. They've assumed the Christian thinks there's no evidence, and they've assumed the fact that there is no evidence. And so all of a sudden the Christian is whittled down into this little box here. Toward the end of the book, for the advice for the master interventionist is to cause doubt in one's moral epistemology. So this really gets into some heavy stuff. But yet they admit on page 177, moral conversations are extremely navigate. And on page 215 in the footnotes, they say morality is complicated. Engaging one's moral epistemology can be difficult. Morality is desperately complex. And so here they are encouraging the interventionists to cause someone to doubt how they came to their moral beliefs. And yet, on the other hand, they're saying morality is incredibly complicated.
What's the contradiction there? A lot of beliefs really come down to a value or moral. So if it comes down to that, questioning that, even if it's complicated, is still part of the process. I'm not sure what's the deal there.
How do they know that they're planting doubt is the right thing to do? I mean, if you're planting doubt in someone's mind about their moral epistemology, certainly you must have an idea of what kind of morality is the right kind of morality, or what kind of epistemology is the right kind of epistemology. But in the book, we're never told what the right kind of epistemology is, nor are we told what the foundation for morality is.
You work together, questioning the claim, questioning whatever someone believes, and you use questions to inquire about that. And you just work together to weed out wrong or invalid or unsound unreliable answers, and just be consistent and talk about it together. It's not like someone has the truth, absolute truth, and then wants to instill doubt into someone so that they come to the absolute truth. It's about being open to being wrong, talking about the claim, the idea, the belief, and working through it together.
So using, modeling, learning better tools to analyze, to think about the things you believe. That's it.
And one thing I found really interesting that they said that, if you encounter someone who is critical of these methods, one answer they give for the reason why someone would be critical of these methods is that, quote, some sort of training that's taught them rehearsed defenses to questions, such as apologetics training in Christianity. So if you're critical of our methods, you must have received some kind of training in Christian apologetics. Why is it training in Christian apologetics? Why not just logic and reason and clear thinking? It's interesting they go right to Christian apologetics as one reason why you might not like our techniques. But I think this brings out the underlying foundation of atheism here, that if you're critical of street epistemology, or if you're critical of interventionist theory as outlined in this book, you must have had some sort of Christian apologetics training.
That's from the section on widely implausible disconfirmation criteria. They say, complicating matters even further, it's possible your conversation partner has received some sort of training that's taught them rehearsed defenses. So if you're using rehearsed defenses, merely talking points, you're not honestly trying to come up with plausible disconfirmation criteria. That sort of thing would get in the way. So that's what they're saying, I think.
And I've interviewed atheists, and I would imagine possibly both of you have interviewed atheists before. And I really try to evaluate those claims the same way. I don't know.
Yeah, they're treated no differently in my book. Yeah.
Yeah, they also say Christianity or indoctrination associated with some forms of political/ideological activism in the same paragraph. So it's not exclusively a religious problem. Many people can be ideologues. Many people can not be able to give plausible disconfirmation criteria.
This book seems to fall into the category of rehearsed defenses to questions too. So
yeah, we don't want to be rote in our mere repeating of the techniques from this book. We want it to be honest and sincere and authentic. That's part of the techniques as well, but it's hard to do. You just have to practice it, and just having the right attitude for these sorts of conversations helps a lot. And the book explains how to do it. There's lots of great stuff. We're not merely doing this rotely or inauthentically.
In this book, the interventionist is never given clear definitions or explanations for the ground of morality, God, the definition of faith.
They don't need that at the beginning of a conversation. You work through it through the conversation. If it comes down to most conversations about various things don't come down to all the way the ground of morality or the foundation of truth. Most people are totally fine talking about just whatever things that would revise our confidence, and that's usually empirical evidence, or it could be other things. We leave it open to the conversation.
Morality doesn't really often come up.
Yeah. The most common question in almost every SE interview I've ever done is, what do you mean by that? So like, I don't need to have necessarily my own definitions going in. As a matter of fact, it's better that I don't. And the most honest and sincere interviews are when I know nothing about what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Daniel's saying, I think they are there and should be put on the table in such honest conversations about God. Yeah, I think SEers, when they talk with like seasoned Christian apologists, you can like start out with maybe some of these things from the get-go, because that's just usually where it goes eventually when you're talking about claims about religion and God with apologists.
And if it's a long talk, it's totally fine to just be like, hey, feel free to ask me a question. Do you want to know my definition of some of these words? Pick a word you want me to define, and I'm more than happy to give my side of things, especially if you're already through the meat of the conversation. It's fine to invite your conversation partner to ask you a question if that's what you want.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of that.
What the correct epistemology is, what counts as evidence or what would count as evidence for God's existence or for the resurrection, nor are we given any kind of foundation for truth. What is truth? Is it objectively true? Is it real? Is there such a thing as objective truth?
That's a great question that we can discuss together.
Yeah, that's a great question to talk about.
It seems like Peter and James assume something, but they never really tell you what that foundation is for morality, for truth, for anything else. They just, the whole book seems to be built up around the idea of here are some conversational techniques that will cause theists to doubt. These kinds of conversations are not easy. Be ready to give a defense. Know what you believe. Take it slow. Examine yourself. Study to show yourself approved. Know what you're talking about and have no qualms about that. Disagree with civility. That's what you can do. That's what I'm trying to do is try to point out some things and disagree on a civil level. You can have disagreement and be civil about it. That's what our Atheist and Christian Book Club does. It's disagreement with civility. Practice kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And so take advantage of their extending the olive branch. You extend it back. Make progress in having civil conversations. So there are some good conversational techniques in this book. Also be aware of the counter atheist apologetics that I think are in this book as well. And so practice kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, as the Bible says, all to the glory of God. I'm Daniel Ray.
There's some charitable listening there at the end. I really appreciated the way he ended that video.
Yeah, good review, good stuff there. Stuff to think about. Appreciate it. And yeah, Daniel, if you want to talk with any of us, feel free to reach out. Come on the SE Discord. We don't really see you around there, so feel free to stop by. There's always conversation going on there. And yeah, sorry, Dali couldn't make it into the show this week. I think he had issues with his data connection, but we'll hopefully be next. We'll be back next Sunday, and we'll continue to review more conversations and videos. This is Crown.
Awesome.
One thing I just want to mention is, Daniel, that video, while I have some disagreements with the way you understood it, I really appreciate your time in making that video, breaking it down, and it definitely made me feel a bit heard by you, and I'm really thankful that there's some more attention to street epistemology and civil discourse, and I like your attitude. So I'll end on that note.
Cool. All right. Thanks everybody for watching, and we will catch you next time. Links to all of our stuff are in the description.
Yeah, check out our channels.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.